Hello, welcome to Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. The Reserve Bank has barred Mahindra Finance from employing the services of third-party agents for any recovery or repossession till further orders. The clampdown comes after a tragic incident in Hazaribagh, where a 27-year-old pregnant woman was allegedly crushed to death under the wheels of a vehicle being driven by a Mahindra Finance recovery agent. The incident has turned the spotlight on the behavior of recovery agents as well. To discuss this further, I'm now joined by DK Mittal, former Financial Services Secretary, and TT Srinivasaraghavan, former MD of Mahindra Finance. Mr. Mittal, what do you think would the impact this move would have on third-party recovery?
Well, the incident is unfortunate, but such accidents can happen in any process. I'm confident Mahindra Finance would have a detailed process and detailed guidelines for the third-party recovery agents, because RBI has issued detailed guidelines on the subject. That being so, I think the basic issue is there a culture to repay? And are there any modes available to execute recovery proceedings? If we were to take secured assets, so DRTs have about 20 lakh crore of cases pending with them, which are, cases could be running into lakhs, but the total amount involved is 20 lakh crores. And I have this information through the RTI. Now, if there's an unsecured loan, there is no process. Going to civil court does not work anything. So what is the method? So the basic issue for RBI would be to debate whether the process for recovery need to be streamlined. And if there is no process to streamline, unfortunately, such events will keep on happening. Nothing can be avoided, because if borrowers are not interested to pay and they're ready to take loans and not interested to pay, then what do you do? Ultimately, financial institutions are having fiduciary responsibility to the money which they have received either from banks or either from public. So I think the basic issue, this issue focuses on that process which need to improve to see that such incidents do not occur. But one-off accident will always happen. Nobody can stop it.
Right. Mr. Srinivasaraghavan, when it comes to vehicle financing and recovery through third-party agents, what are the checks and balances that are in place? What are some of the supervisory norms that must be in effect when there are third-party agents working for a company?
Let me first, Parikshit, begin by saying that it's extremely unfortunate and distressing that something like this happened. It is, extremely tragic. Now, looking at the larger question which you asked, in terms of checks and balances, in terms of regulatory circulars and things like most NBFCs, if not all of them, have very detailed contracts which they sign with these recovery agents, where clearly they spell out what can and cannot be done. So in terms of what's there, in terms of the framework, I don't believe there's a lot more that needs to be done. However, I think we need to, of course, it's difficult to do given that the atmosphere is very charged right now, but we have to step back a little and look at a slightly wider and holistic picture. If you look at the remedies that are available to lenders in general, but NBFCs in particular, increasingly, there's been more and more fetters on NBFCs being able to recover their loans. On SARFACI, for example, it's still not fully available to NBFCs. On arbitration, the Supreme Court has recently held that old arbitration clauses are no longer valid. They've made that a little more complicated. So if you look at the avenues open to lenders to recover their dues in a rightful manner, they have been fettered more and more, right? That does not therefore mean that, you can employ means which are not within the four corners of the law. That is nobody's case. But I think in order for such incidents to be prevented, I think the system as a whole, both the legal system and the regulatory system, needs to look at ways where lenders have better recourse to their primary security. Because bear in mind, in asset financing, primarily what the lenders rely on is the asset. So if there is a default, if there is a continuing default, the only remedy open to them is to take back their asset, try and dispose it off and recover what they can. So this is what has been done for decades by NBFCs particularly. And of course, all prudence needs to be followed by them. All the necessary precautions need to be taken. And this is not really about third party or an employee. I mean, the same accident would have happened if it was an employee of the company doing this, for example. Because I don't know the facts of this case because I only know what's been reported in the media, but I have every reason to believe that this was an accident. This was not a deliberate act by this repossession agent.
Right.
And while, as I said, the incident itself is terribly distressing and terribly unfortunate, I don't think we can narrow it down to recovery agents. I think it's about the whole system of recovery that is available to lenders in general, NBFCs in particular.
All right. Mr. Srinivasaraghavan, do you also feel that the RBI should be careful so as to not impact the ability of companies like Mahindra Finance, other NBFCs to recover loans, also to repossess vehicles?
Absolutely, yes, because the right to repossess is enshrined in the agreement which the lender and borrower sign. It is an inherent right which the lender has. Of course, due process has to be followed, notices to be served. That is all clearly spelled out, clearly enunciated. But once due process has been followed, the right to repossession is something that is inherent in every lender's agreement. And so it should be. Because as I said, what is the other fallback that they have?
Right.
So absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Their right to repossess should remain.
All right. So right to repossess must remain. Of course, the RBI has also told Mahindra Finance that you can go ahead and repossess vehicles, but through your own agents, not through third-party agents. Mr. Mittal, coming back to you, are there any measures that can be put into place in order to make sure that such accidents don't happen in future? There are some checks and balances in place, but at the same time, the ability to repossess is not impacted?
So we do not have detailed information of the facts of the case, whether there was an altercation, whether the recovery team was attacked by somebody. We have no idea on that. This unfortunate event it led to the death of a person, which is unfortunate. But, as I said, any such accident could happen in any process. And, if recovery agencies are not permitted, it will be very difficult for any FI, any financial institution to do lending. That's a very standard process. So what need to be done is to ensure that the person who are involved, they are debarred to participate in any process of recovery in any financial institution. So they are punished heavily. And the banks and the agencies which are doing it should be penalized to pay damages to the person whose family member had died.
Mr. Srinivasaraghavan, why do, if we want to explain it to our viewers across the country, why do NBFCs employ third-party agents when it comes to repossessing vehicles?
Well, it's simply a question of practical reality, right? Because repossessing vehicles is not the primary business of an NBFC. The primary business of an NBFC is to extend credit and hopefully recover all of the money which they lend. It's only in a small percentage of cases where things go out of hand, where repossession becomes necessary, and there is a specialized group of people now who are these recovery agents who are able to do this far more efficiently and at scale, right? So it's logical, just like so many other things today are outsourced, not only by financial institutions, but by all manner of institutions. This is something that is not necessarily a core competence of the NBFCs. And if there are people who do it better and who do it more efficiently, that's the way to go. And given the volumes of business that NBFCs and banks write today, this is the only practical and realistic way to achieve this.
Right. So finally, Mr. Srinivasaraghavan, and I'll put this to Mr. Mittal as well. Now, when RBI is looking at this entire case, there is a police investigation going on as well. what is the best way forward in order to regulate the sector, but at the same time do not impact the ability to take back vehicles for which loans have not been paid back on time and dues have not been cleared?
Listen, I think there's no easy answers to this, but a blanket ban is not necessarily going to help, because you also have to look at the other side. Ultimately, banks and NBFCs are in business not with their own money. I mean, they are accountable to their depositors, to their lenders, and therefore safety of their assets, safety of their capital is also equally important. I would argue that in this case, if the individual concerned has breached the law in whatever manner, then deal with that individual. If criminal proceedings are warranted, then certainly use those. But I think, to me, to put fetters on Mahindra Finance or on the sector as a whole is certainly excessive. One individual has stepped out of line. Let him be dealt with as applicable under the law. Let this be a message to others that you cannot violate the law, that you have to live within the letter and spirit of the law. Right. But to say that we will ban this practice altogether, to me, is actually counterproductive, because in a few months' time, you're going to find this showing up as higher delinquencies and higher NPAs on the balance sheets of NBFCs and banks.
All right, so strong words coming in from the former Secretary Financial Services and also TT Srinivasaraghavan, former MD of Sundaram Finance, saying that it would be counterproductive to put a ban on repossession through third-party agents because you will see higher NPAs in the months to come. We're heading into a short break, but don't go anywhere. The government has issued draft norms to make rear seatbelt alarm mandatory for car companies. But is the industry ready to walk the talk? We also speak to former Road Transport Secretary Vijay Chhibber and Vikram Kirloskar of Toyota Kirloskar Motor. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You are watching Newscentre. Let's shift our focus to road safety. The recent death of Cyrus Mistry in a road accident has once again raised questions about vehicle and structural safety of roads in the country. Remember, 1.5 lakh deaths take place in road accidents every year. Joining me now to take this forward is Vijay Chhibber, former Secretary of Road Transport and Highways in the central government. Mr. Chhibber, thank you very much for joining us. Do you think this recent action taken by the government to urge car makers to have rear seatbelt reminders or seatbelt reminders for all front-facing passengers, 6 airbags in cars, speed alerts as well, do you think this is a step in the right direction, considering the fact that 45% of the accidents on the road are involving two-wheelers?
Yes, you may be right statistically in terms of two-wheeler accidents, etc. But, my real concern is that we seem to discuss issues relating to road safety only when there is a major event like the one you just mentioned, the unfortunate death of Cyrus Mistry. But, this is a far more serious subject, and one has to peg away at this consistently. Road safety is actually becoming a public health emergency in the country for the last many, many years. I retired about 7 years back, and there's a sense of deja vu because this is exactly what we were discussing while I was in office, and we are back in the same situation today. Rather than getting into the nitty-gritty of should the rear passengers be required to have the seatbelt, should there be an alarm, etc., we had actually, way back in 2014 itself, decided that whatever is the road safety architecture in terms of norms that the EU notifies, we shall follow suit, maybe with a lag of 3 to 4 years, to enable the industry to pick up in terms of manufacturing capacities, etc. So, this debate whether we should have this, we should not have it, I think this is completely trash. We should just adopt what are the best practices globally. And the European model is reasonably robust, reasonably thought through. And I don't really see the industry having any grouse in this. Industry falls in line very quickly. It's a question of some additional costs here and there. But what my major concern is that despite the high level of deaths that you mentioned, and it's not only deaths, it's 4 or 5 times the numbers for those who are injured. That also has its own financial and other costs. So the real issue is the political establishment really recognizing this as a public health concern and public health issue, which is serious enough where political capital should be put behind it? I say this because those countries like France and the US, who've managed to control and even bring down the fatalities, have managed to do this only when the political leadership actually caught the bull by the horns. I don't see that happening in our geography, and I think that's a great pity.
So do you think, sir, the problem is enforcement, lack of awareness, lack of attention? As you said, and this is what several car makers have also said, that it's no problem meeting these norms. Maybe with an extended timeline we can, but the problem is if you take this action only when there is a high-profile incident.
You're absolutely right, Parikshit. This is really so there are 3 pillars, basically. It's education, it's the engineering part in terms of the physical infrastructure, and lastly, enforcement. We seem to be very, very casual in terms of enforcement. Chalta hai attitude is across the board. I remember on an official visit to Australia, myself and one of my colleagues, we landed at the airport. The embassy had sent us a big limousine to pick us up. Chauffeur was there, the liveried chauffeur, and we got in the usual way. We were busy talking about whom we were to meet and what we were to discuss. But this gentleman, he got into the front seat and he said, "Sir, please put on your seat belts." So we sort of casually said, yes, we are doing it. You get on with we were in a bit of a hurry as the flight was late. Well, this guy said, "Sir, I will not be able to start the engine until your seat belts are on." Here was a guy dedicated to his job, very clear that this is something which shall get done. It's the lack of this rigor which is actually the major concern and a possible cause of many of the fatalities that we are having and the numbers that you just mentioned. So I think I agree with you. Enforcement is something which has to have a rigor and a consistency.
Okay, and my final question, sir, do you also feel that the government must also be tougher with the industry? A lot of times there are divisions within the industry on what should be the road ahead, whether there should be an extended timeline when it comes to 6 airbags. Do you think that that extra time should be given, or these are things which have been in the offing for many years now, and these are global standards?
So that's why, Parikshit, I mentioned to you, I'm a little amazed that these debates are still being conducted, because as I said, way back in 2014 itself, we had decided that whatever is mandated in the EU framework by way of rules and regulations which impact road safety, those shall get notified with a lag of maybe 3 to 4 years. The lag was to account for the fact that the industry has to get their technologies in and to allow them to adapt to the changing requirements. But there was no doubt in our minds that whatever is mandated in the European geography shall get implemented here. The real problem is, even if you have a seatbelt, are you putting it on? And is there an enforcement to ensure that you are putting it on? I think it's the last part, the enforcement, which is very, very important. And it is in this context that I was mentioning that, for example, the Prime Minister went hammer and tongs about the Swachh Abhiyan program. And I think he expended a lot of political capital, which paid dividends, because the entire country, all the state governments, all the district administrations needs to be evolved in the context of road safety. We can't have only Mr. Gadkari trying his best to educate the Indian population. I think it requires an all-embracing effort by government, perhaps led by the Prime Minister himself. And I'm sure that there would be dividends if the kind of mobilization takes place.
All right. So you're saying we need to put political capital behind it. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Chhibber. The automotive industry, as we said earlier, has been seeking more time to implement the new norms. Let's get an view from Vikram Kirloskar, the Vice President of Toyota India. I began by asking him about his reaction to recent vehicle safety norms mandated by the government.
Well, I think government has acknowledged an issue of road safety, not just because of the recent sad accident, but Mr. Gadkari has been continuously harping on road safety and the number of deaths in India, and he's been trying his best to introduce more and more regulations on vehicles. But this is a holistic issue I think we have to look at. It's not just the vehicle alone. Of course, the vehicles have to be safe, have to meet global international standards on safety, but we have to look at the entire ecosystem, the quality of the roads, the training of the drivers, behavior of people who are driving cars, behavior of people and other people who are driving cars on the road, that everyone follows rules and regulations. I think it's an understanding, holistic understanding of safety requirement that is very important.
Right. Now, when it comes to road safety in India, which aspect needs immediate addressing according to you, Mr. Kirloskar?
It is all aspect. If you've driven on a highway, you see people overtaking left, right, center. These are fundamental traffic rule issues, and fundamental safety driving issues. I mean, I think we have to educate everyone in this country and take an understanding that safety is important, and some of it is just commonsensical. It's maturity of driving. It's not all dependent on the car. It's depending on the attitude of the driver towards safety. It's the attitude of the pedestrian towards safety. It's the whole ecosystem. I think if you look at about 25 years ago when Toyota first came in the country, and I was talking with some of the Japanese my partners on safety, they said, how do you address safety when you see people sitting on top of a bus or sitting on top of a train? Then you know it's obviously not safe. So we keep doing programs across the country. We've been doing it for several years, right from school children onwards, to have a holistic understanding of safety. And I think that's very, very important that on a society basis, we start understanding safety.
Okay, and when it comes to some of these initiatives that vehicle manufacturers will have to make, be it 6 airbags, or be it a 3-point safety, 3-point seat belt, or seatbelt reminders, do you think this will be difficult for the industry to implement, or only the timeline is an issue?
I don't want to talk about the industry. About our own company, we've started implementing it about 10 years ago. We took a stand, Toyota took a stand 10, 12 years ago that he wants all vehicles to be of global safety standards, irrespective of the country standard.
All right, so that was Vikram Kirloskar saying that they are following European standards, and they have higher safety standards for their vehicles for the last 10 years or so. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.